I watched from the rental car as David handed my keys to his sister Lisa, both of them laughing in our driveway. The notification on my phone had pinged just minutes earlier. Vehicle leaving designated zone. A feature from the tracking device I'd installed after the last time my husband had borrowed something without asking. The look on both their faces when I pulled up behind them remotely disabled the engine as Lisa tried to drive away, and revealed I'd been tracking the car's location the entire time? Absolutely priceless. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The afternoon sun filtered through the blinds of my home office as I packed the last of my work documents. The conference in Phoenix was a career opportunity I couldn't miss. 3 days presenting my research to industry leaders, potentially opening doors to the promotion I'd been working toward for years. David had seemed supportive when I first mentioned the trip, though his enthusiasm had noticeably dimmed as the date approached. "Are you sure you need to go for all 3 days?" he'd asked the night before, lounging on our bed as I carefully arranged my presentation materials. "Couldn't you just fly in for your talk and come back the same day?" I'd paused my packing, studying his face for what might be behind the question. After 8 years of marriage, I'd grown familiar with David's expressions. The slight furrow between his brows, the way his fingers tapped against his thigh when he was holding something back. "The networking events are just as important as my presentation," I'd explained, keeping my voice even. "You know how long I've been working toward this position in the company." He'd nodded, flashing the charming smile that had first caught my attention at a mutual friends party a decade ago. "Of course, Emma. I'm proud of you. I just miss you when you're gone." There had been a time when such comments would have melted my resolve, made me consider rearranging my plans to accommodate his wishes. I'd spent the early years of our relationship prioritizing his comfort, his career, his preferences. But things had been shifting between us, the balance of consideration increasingly one-sided. The changes had been subtle at first, borrowed. Items that were never returned to their place, small decisions made without consultation, casual dismissals of my concerns as overthinking. But over the past year, the pattern had become impossible to ignore, culminating in the incident 3 months ago that had prompted me to install the tracking device in my car. I'd returned from a weekend visiting my mother to find my car's mileage had increased by over 200 miles. When questioned, David had shrugged it off. He'd needed to visit a client out of town. His car was making a strange noise, and he hadn't thought it was worth bothering me about while I was away. "It's just a car, Emma," he'd said with that disarming smile. "We share everything, right?" But it wasn't just about the car. It was about the assumption that my possessions, my boundaries, my autonomy were somehow negotiable without my input. The tracking device had been a small act of reclaiming control, of establishing a boundary that didn't require his understanding or approval to exist. Melissa, my colleague and closest friend, had raised an eyebrow when I mentioned it over lunch the following week. "A tracking device? Isn't that a bit extreme?" she'd asked, stirring her iced tea with deliberate focus. "It's my car," I'd replied simply. "I just want to know where it is." What I hadn't shared with Melissa was the growing unease I felt, the sense that there were other areas of my life where boundaries were being crossed without acknowledgement. The tracking device wasn't about surveillance. It was about verification, about confirming what I already suspected, but couldn't quite articulate. Now, as I zipped my suitcase closed and carried it downstairs, David was waiting in the kitchen, preparing a sandwich with theatrical domesticity. "I made you something for the road," he announced, sliding a carefully wrapped package across the counter. "And I've already put gas in your car, full tank, ready to go." "That's thoughtful. Thank you," I replied, genuinely touched by the gesture, despite my lingering concerns. This was the David I had fallen in love with, attentive, caring, anticipating needs before they were expressed. He helped carry my luggage to the car, asking questions about my presentation, offering encouragement that seemed sincere. As I started the engine, he leaned through the window for a final kiss. "Have a great trip," he said, his blue eyes meeting mine with apparent warmth. "Don't worry about anything here, I've got it all under control." Something in his phrasing triggered a faint warning bell, but I dismissed it as paranoia born from past disappointments. With a final wave, I backed out of the driveway, mind-y. Already shifting to the conference, the presentation I had spent months perfecting, the colleagues I was eager to reconnect with. The drive to the airport was smooth, the check-in process mercifully quick. It wasn't until I was settled in my seat, scrolling through emails as we waited for takeoff, that my phone chimed with a notification I had almost forgotten I'd set up. Vehicle leaving designated zone. I stared at the screen, momentarily confused. The designated zone was a 5-mile radius around our home and my office, the areas where the car would typically be used during a normal week. Why would the car be moving when I had just left it in the airport's long-term parking? Opening the tracking app, I watched as the blue dot representing my vehicle moved steadily away from the airport, following the familiar route back toward our neighborhood. A cold realization settled in my stomach as I connected the dots. David had come to the airport, retrieved my car from where I'd parked it, and was now driving it somewhere else. But why? He had his own car, a sleek black sedan he'd purchased just last year, and typically babied with regular detailing. What possible reason could he have for taking mine without asking, especially knowing I'd be able to see its movement? Unless, of course, he didn't know about the tracking device. I'd never explicitly mentioned it, had installed it during one of his business trips, a small, unobtrusive device connected to the car's diagnostic port beneath the steering column. In the 3 months since, there had never been a reason to bring it up. The car had stayed within its designated zones, exactly where it was supposed to be. Until now. My finger hovered over the call button, ready to demand an explanation, when a stewardess gently reminded me to switch my phone to airplane mode for takeoff. Reluctantly complying, I leaned back in my seat, mind racing with possibilities, none of them particularly reassuring. The 3-hour flight passed in a blur of rehearsed presentation points and increasingly elaborate scenarios explaining David's behavior. By the time we landed in Phoenix, I had worked myself into a state of agitated speculation that threatened to overshadow the professional purpose of my trip. As soon as the plane touched down, I switched my phone back on, immediately checking the tracking app. The car was stationary now, parked at an address I didn't recognize, about 15 miles from our home. Zooming in on the satellite view, I could see it was a residential area, a neighborhood of modest single-family homes not unlike our own. Should I call him? Confront him directly? Or wait and observe, gather more information before revealing that I knew what he had done? The second option felt more strategic, more likely to reveal the full scope of whatever was happening. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I took a screenshot of the location, then switched to my email app, focusing on the conference schedule that awaited me. Whatever David was doing with my car, it would have to wait. I had worked too hard for this opportunity to let personal concerns derail my professional focus. The conference hotel was elegant without being ostentatious, the kind of place that signaled professional success while avoiding wasteful extravagance. I checked in efficiently, changed into more formal attire, and headed down to the opening reception, determined to network as planned despite the nagging questions at the back of my mind. "Emma." The voice cut through the ambient conversation, and I turned to see Mark Chen, our company's VP of Research and Development, waving me over. "Just the person I was hoping to see. There's someone you need to meet." For the next 2 hours, I circulated through the reception, engaging in precisely the kind of career-advancing conversations I had come for. People had read my published work were interested in my upcoming presentation, offered connections that could prove valuable in the months ahead. It was vindicating, energizing, exactly what I needed to temporarily push aside my concerns about David and the car. It wasn't until I returned to my hotel room, kicking off my heels with a sigh of relief, that I checked the tracking app again. The car had moved once more, this time to a location I recognized immediately: David's sister Lisa's house. The pieces clicked into place with an almost audible snap. Lisa had mentioned wanting to borrow a car for the weekend during our last family dinner. Something about her own vehicle being in the shop and needing to transport her kids to various activities. David had offered his sedan, but she'd declined, saying something about preferring a larger vehicle for all the sports equipment. Like my SUV, had David really gone behind my back, retrieved my car from the airport without permission, and loaned it to his sister without even asking me? After all our conversations about boundaries and communication? I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, anger building like a physical presence in my chest. This wasn't about the car itself, it was about respect, about the fundamental acknowledgement that my possessions and preferences mattered just as much as his, that decisions involving my property required my input, my consent. My phone buzzed with an incoming text. David. How was the flight? Made it to the hotel okay? So casual, so normal, as if he hadn't just violated a basic principle of our partnership. I typed back a response that revealed nothing of my awareness. Flight was good, hotel is nice. About to review my presentation again before tomorrow. His reply came quickly. Don't stay up too late. You need your rest to wow them tomorrow. The caring husband, the supportive partner, the version of David I had fallen in love with, the version I kept hoping would be consistent rather than intermittent. The version that made the other behaviors so much harder to address, because how could I complain about someone who was, in many ways, attentive and loving? But the car's location on my screen told a different story, one of assumptions and entitlements, of decisions made unilaterally about things that weren't his to decide. I closed the tracking app and opened my presentation, forcing my focus back to where it needed to be. Tomorrow was too important to sacrifice to this frustration, this hurt. I would deal with David and the car situation after my professional obligations were fulfilled. The next morning, I dressed with particular care. A tailored navy suit that projected competence and confidence, hair-styled simply but professionally, minimal jewelry that wouldn't distract from my message. As I applied a final touch of lipstick, my phone chimed with another notification from the tracking app. Vehicle on the move. A quick check showed my car leaving Lisa's neighborhood, heading toward the commercial district where she worked as an office manager for a dental practice. So she was using my car for her regular commute as well, not just the weekend activities she had mentioned. The presumption of it all sent a fresh wave of irritation through me, but I pushed it aside, focusing on the day ahead. My presentation was scheduled for 11 a.m., with a panel discussion to follow, and potential investors would be in attendance. This was not the time for personal distractions. The conference room was already half full when I arrived to set up, colleagues from competing firms mingling with industry analysts and potential clients. Mark Chen caught my eye from across the room, giving me an encouraging thumbs up as I connected my laptop to the projector system and arranged my materials on the small podium. Nervous? Asked Janelle Peters, another presenter scheduled for the afternoon session. Focused, I replied with a smile that conveyed more confidence than I felt. This project has been my baby for the past 18 months. I just want to do it justice. And I did. Despite the personal turmoil simmering beneath the surface, when the time came to present my research, I stepped into the role with complete professionalism. My voice was steady, my data compelling, my responses to questions thoughtful and articulate. The audience was engaged, the feedback immediate and positive. By the time the session ended, I had collected a stack of business cards and scheduled 2 follow-up meetings with potential collaborators. Mark Chen approached as I was gathering my materials, his expression approving. "That was excellent, Emma," he said, helping me disconnect my laptop. The board members who attended were particularly impressed by the market application section. I wouldn't be surprised if there's movement on that promotion when we get back. The validation was sweet, a confirmation that my professional judgment and abilities were valued, recognized. It stood in stark contrast to the situation with David, where my perspective seemed perpetually secondary, my boundaries negotiable. As if summoned by my thoughts, a text from him appeared on my phone. "How did the presentation go?" "Knocking their socks off like I knew you would." Again, that dissonance. Supportive words masking disrespectful actions. I replied with a brief, but positive update, making no mention of the car or my awareness of its whereabouts. Let him believe his decision had gone unnoticed for now. The second day of the conference passed in a similar rhythm of professional engagement and private monitoring. The tracking app showed my car moving between Lisa's home and workplace, with occasional stops at locations I assumed were related to her children's activities. David texted regularly, always inquiring about the conference, sharing mundane updates about his day, never once mentioning that he had given my car to his sister. By the third morning, as I packed for my flight that afternoon, I had formulated a plan. Rather than confronting David immediately, revealing what I knew as soon as I returned home, I would wait. Observe. See how he intended to handle the situation once I was back, whether he would admit what he had done or attempt to cover it up. After checking out of the hotel, I caught a rideshare to the airport, boarded my return flight, and settled in for the journey home, mentally rehearsing various scenarios for what might await me. Would David pick me up at the airport in his car, claiming mine was somehow unavailable? Would he fabricate a story about mechanical problems or lend some other explanation for its absence? When we landed, I switched my phone off airplane mode to find a text waiting. "Can't pick you up, stuck in a work meeting." "Take an Uber home?" "Sorry, babe, can't wait to see you tonight." Convenient, and exactly what I had anticipated. Instead of replying, I checked the tracking app once more. My car was still at Lisa's workplace, exactly where it had been when I boarded my flight in Phoenix. With a sense of determined calm, I arranged for a rental car directly from the airport, providing my license and credit card to a clerk who processed the transaction with board efficiency. 30 minutes later, I was driving a nondescript sedan toward Lisa's office, timing my arrival for shortly after 5 p.m., when I knew she typically ended her workday. Parking across the street, I waited, watching the entrance to the small professional building housing several medical practices. At 5:12 p.m., Lisa emerged, engaged in conversation with a colleague as they walked toward the parking lot. I watched as she approached my SUV, casually unlocked it with a key David must have provided, and tossed her bag onto the passenger seat before settling behind the wheel. This was the moment of decision. I could continue observing, follow her home, confront them both later in a more private setting. Or I could address the situation immediately, directly, without giving either of them time to construct justifications or excuses. The choice was clear. Starting the rental car, I pulled out of my parking space and followed as Lisa drove my SUV out of the lot, waiting until we reached a red light at a major intersection before pulling up directly behind her. The tracking app on my phone included a feature I had never used before: the ability to remotely disable the engine for recovery purposes in case of theft. As the light turned green and Lisa began to accelerate, I pressed the button. My SUV rolled to a gentle stop in the middle of the intersection, hazard lights automatically activating as the engine shut down. From my position directly behind, I could see Lisa's confused movements as she tried to restart the vehicle without success. Cars began to honk, drivers maneuvering around the unexpected obstacle as Lisa's gestures became increasingly frantic. I parked the rental on the shoulder, grabbed my purse, and walked calmly toward my disabled vehicle. The look on Lisa's face when I tapped on the driver's side window was indeed priceless. Shock giving way to recognition, followed by a flush of embarrassment that spread across her features like a visible wave. "Car trouble?" I asked as she rolled down the window, my voice carrying a sweetness that contradicted the steel beneath. "Emma!" she exclaimed, eyes wide. You're back from your trip." "Clearly," I replied, smiling pleasantly. "I'm curious, though. How did you end up driving my car? The one I left parked at the airport 3 days ago?" Lisa's gaze darted around, as if searching for an escape route or perhaps assistance from the increasingly impatient drivers navigating around us. "David said, he told me you knew about this, that you were fine with me borrowing it while mine is in the shop." "Did he?" I maintained the smile, though it no longer reached my eyes. "How interesting. And did David mention that I have a tracking device installed? Or that I can remotely disable the engine when someone takes my car without permission?" The color drained from her face, realization dawning that she had been caught in the middle of something more complicated than a simple misunderstanding. "I had no idea," she stammered. "He made it sound like you two had discussed it. I never would have." "I believe you," I interrupted, my anger directed not at her, but at the person who had put her in this position. "Why don't you move to the passenger seat? I'll drive us somewhere we can talk more comfortably, and then you can explain exactly what David told you." 20 minutes later, we were seated at a quiet corner table in a nearby cafe, 2 untouched coffees between us as Lisa recounted her conversation with David. According to her, he had called the day I left for Phoenix, offering the use of my car for the weekend. When she had asked if I was okay with the arrangement, he had assured her that we had discussed it before my trip, and that I had suggested it myself, knowing her car was being repaired. "I should have confirmed with you directly," Lisa admitted, guilt evident in her expression. It just seemed so normal. David being helpful, you being thoughtful. It fit the pattern of how you both usually are. The insight was unexpectedly painful, that David could so easily exploit the goodwill we had built, the reputation for generosity and consideration we had cultivated as a couple. That he could use my own character as cover for decisions made without my knowledge or consent. "What are you going to do?" Lisa asked, fidgeting with her coffee cup. "I feel terrible about this. If I had known—" "This isn't your fault," I assured her, reaching a decision as I spoke. "But I would appreciate it if you didn't mention our conversation to David just yet. I'd like to see how he handles my return, what explanation he offers, for the car's absence." Lisa nodded, visibly relieved to be absolved of blame, but clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Of course. Whatever you need." We parted with an awkward hug, Lisa catching a rideshare back to her office where she had left her personal belongings, while I returned to my SUV, reactivated via the app, and began the drive home. The rental car would need to be returned tomorrow, an extra expense necessitated by David's actions, another small item on the growing ledger of inconsideration. Our house was dark when I arrived, David not yet home from work. I parked my SUV in its usual spot in the driveway, brought my luggage inside, and began unpacking with deliberate calm, waiting for the moment when he would return and be forced to confront the evidence of his deception. At 6:45 p.m., headlights swept across the living room wall as David's sedan pulled into the driveway beside my SUV. There was a noticeable pause before the car door opened and closed, footsteps slower than usual approaching the front door. When he entered, his expression was carefully neutral, though I could detect the slight widening of his eyes, the momentary hesitation in his stride as he processed the fact that not only was I home, but my car was as well. "Emma!" he exclaimed, recovering quickly. "You're back already. I thought your flight wasn't until later." "I caught an earlier connection," I replied, folding a blouse with precise movements. The final session ended sooner than expected. He approached for a welcome home kiss, which I allowed, but didn't reciprocate with my usual warmth. How was the presentation? Did you wow them like I knew you would? The presentation went very well, I acknowledged, setting aside the folded garment. Mark thinks the promotion is likely when we return. Apparently, several board members were impressed. That's fantastic. David's enthusiasm seemed genuine, his pride in my accomplishments one of the aspects of our relationship that had always felt authentic. We should celebrate this weekend. I studied him, waiting for some acknowledgement of the car, some explanation for its absence and miraculous return. When none came, I decided to create the opening myself. The strangest thing happened when I landed, I began, keeping my tone conversational. I was about to call an Uber, since you mentioned being stuck in a meeting, but then I realized I couldn't remember exactly where I had parked my car at the airport. David's smile flickered almost imperceptibly. Oh? Did you find it okay? Eventually, I replied, watching him carefully. Though it took some doing. Long-term parking can be so confusing after a few days away. He nodded sympathetically, moving toward the kitchen in what appeared to be a casual retreat. Want something to drink? I picked up that white wine you like. I followed, leaning against the doorframe as he busied himself with glasses and the corkscrew, his back partially turned in a posture that concealed his expression. David, I said quietly, why did you give my car to Lisa without asking me? The corkscrew paused mid-twist. For a moment he remained completely still, as if calculating his options before slowly turning to face me. What are you talking about? The faint confusion, the attempt to gaslight me into questioning my own certainty, ignited a flare of anger I didn't bother to suppress. Please don't insult my intelligence. I know you took my car from the airport and gave it to Lisa. I know you told her I had approved an arrangement I knew nothing about. What I don't know is why you would do something so fundamentally disrespectful, or why you thought I wouldn't find out. David's expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, defensiveness, calculation, before settling into a version of the charming smile that had become increasingly transparent to me. It's not a big deal, Emma. Lisa needed a car. Yours was just sitting at the airport. I was going to put it back before you returned. No harm done. No harm? I repeated, the calm in my voice belying the hurt beneath. You made a unilateral decision about my property, lied to your sister about having my permission, and planned to replace the car without ever telling me what happened. And you don't see how that's harmful to our relationship? He set the wine, bottled down with more force than necessary. You're overreacting. It's just a car. We share everything, don't we? What's the problem if I loan your car to my sister who needed help? The problem, I replied evenly, is that you didn't ask. The problem is that you assumed your needs, or in this case, Lisa's needs, automatically outweighed my right to make decisions about my own possessions. The problem is that this is part of a pattern where my boundaries don't seem to matter to you. David's expression hardened, the charming facade dropping completely. A pattern? You're tracking me now, is that it? Spying on me? I'm tracking. My car, I corrected, which proved to be a necessary precaution, given what happened the moment I was out of town. We stood in silence for a long moment, the uncorked wine forgotten between us. The fundamental disconnect in our perspectives laid bare in a way that couldn't be easily dismissed or papered over with charm or deflection. What now? David finally asked, his tone suggesting he expected an apology, a reconciliation, a return to the status quo where his actions were accepted without significant consequence. I considered the question carefully, weighing years of shared history against the growing evidence of fundamental incompatibility in how we viewed partnership, respect, and autonomy. Now, I said with a clarity that surprised even me, we have a long, honest conversation about whether this relationship is still working for both of us. Because I'm not interested in continuing a marriage where my boundaries are optional and my consent is assumed rather than asked for. The tracking device had revealed more than just my car's unauthorized journey. It had illuminated patterns I had been reluctant to fully acknowledge, questions I had been hesitant to ask directly. Whatever happened next, whether the conversation led to reconciliation or separation, I was no longer willing to accept less than the respect and consideration I deserved. Sometimes the smallest technologies reveal the largest truths about the people we think we know best. And sometimes, tracking a car leads to finding yourself in the process. The morning light filtered through the kitchen blinds, casting long shadows across the granite countertop where I sat, nursing my second cup of coffee. David had spent the night in the guest room after our confrontation, his absence from our bed a physical manifestation of the distance that had been growing between us for months, perhaps years. The house was quiet, his typical morning routine, disrupted by the uncomfortable new reality we found ourselves navigating. I scrolled through my emails, professional congratulations from conference attendees, mixing with meeting requests from potential collaborators. Under different circumstances, I would have been elated by these developments. Now, they served as a bittersweet reminder of how much I had reclaimed my professional identity in recent years, even as my personal life had begun unraveling in ways I had been reluctant to fully acknowledge. The sound of the guest room door opening broke the silence. David appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed for work in a crisp button-down and slacks, his expression carefully neutral. "Good morning," he offered, his tone conciliatory, but guarded. "Morning," I replied, not looking up from my laptop. The ball was in his court after last night's revelation. I had made my position clear. He poured himself coffee, movements deliberate as he leaned against the counter opposite me. "I've been thinking about what you said." I closed my laptop, giving him my full attention. And I think you're right that we need to talk about some things," he admitted, fingers tapping against his mug in that familiar nervous pattern. "But I also think you're making a bigger deal out of the car situation than necessary." The familiar deflection, minimizing my concerns rather than addressing the underlying issue. I had expected this, yet disappointment settled in my chest nonetheless. "It's not about the car, David. It never was." "Then what is it about? Because from where I'm standing, you're threatening our marriage over a borrowed vehicle." I took a measured breath, determined to maintain the clarity I had found in the past few days. "It's about respect. It's about the fact that you made a decision about my property without consulting me, lied to your sister about having my permission, and planned to return the car without ever telling me what happened. If I hadn't installed that tracking device, I never would have known." He set his mug down with more force than necessary, coffee sloshing over the rim. "The tracking device. Let's talk about that, Emma. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel? That you've been monitoring me? Spying on our life?" "I wasn't monitoring you," I corrected, refusing to accept the redirection. "I was tracking my car after the last time you borrowed something without asking and returned it damaged. And clearly, it was necessary." David ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. "This isn't who we are, Emma. We're not the kind of couple who spies on each other, who keeps score, who can't share without formal permission slips." "You're right," I agreed, surprising him. "That's not who we should be. But we've become something else entirely, haven't we? A couple where one person makes unilateral decisions and the other is expected to accommodate without question, where boundaries are seen as negotiable rather than respected." He began to pace the kitchen, the controlled facade cracking to reveal genuine distress beneath. "You make it sound so calculated, so malicious. I was trying to help my sister. I didn't think it was a big deal." "That's exactly the problem. You didn't think about how it would affect me, how it would feel to discover my car was gone without my knowledge or consent. Your intentions don't change the impact of your actions." A tense silence settled between us, the morning sunlight, now fully illuminating the kitchen, leaving no shadows in which to hide uncomfortable truths. David glanced at his watch, a convenient escape from the conversation. I need to get to work. I have a client meeting at 9. I nodded, unsurprised by the retreat. We still need to finish this discussion. Tonight, he promised, already moving toward the door. We'll talk tonight and figure this out. After he left, I remained at the counter, the house suddenly too quiet, too empty. The familiar protective numbness that had carried me through the confrontation began to recede, leaving space for the hurt, the anger, the profound disappointment to resurface. Not just about the car, but about the pattern it represented, the gradual erosion of mutual respect that should have been the foundation of our partnership. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. Lunch today? Dying to hear about the conference? The prospect of sharing the professional triumph alongside the personal revelation was overwhelming. How to explain that while my career was finally gaining the momentum I had worked so hard for, my marriage might be crumbling beneath the weight of accumulated disregard? Can't today, I replied. Catching up after being away. Tomorrow? Her response came quickly. Tomorrow works. Everything okay? A simple question with a complicated answer. Was everything okay? My career was taking off, my professional judgment validated in ways I had long sought. Yet my personal life was in turmoil. The relationship I had invested, 8 years in, revealed to be built on shakier ground than I had allowed myself to recognize. Just tired, I texted back, unwilling to unpack the complexity via message. Talk tomorrow. Setting my phone aside, I moved to the home office I had carved out of our spare bedroom, determined to channel my emotional energy into something productive. The promotion that now seemed within reach would require preparation, a transition, plan for my current projects, a vision for the expanded role I hoped to step into. Immersing myself in work had always been my refuge, the place where competence and clarity reigned even when other aspects of life became muddled. Today was no different. Hours passed as I drafted proposals, updated timelines, and crafted the framework for the next phase of my professional evolution. It was past noon when the doorbell interrupted my focus. Through the front window, I could see Lisa standing on the porch, her expression hesitant as she shifted her weight from foot to foot. I opened the door, greeting her with a neutrality that bordered on coolness. Lisa, this is unexpected. I know, and I'm sorry to just show up, she said, clutching her purse strap like a lifeline. I called in sick to work today. I couldn't focus after everything that happened. Can we talk? I hesitated, weighing the potential benefits against the emotional drain of rehashing yesterday's events. But Lisa had been caught in the middle of David's deception through no fault of her own. She deserved the chance to clear the air. Come in, I said, stepping aside. Would you like some coffee? She followed me to the kitchen, declining the eyes offer with a small shake of her head. I'm already jittery enough. Emma, I came to apologize properly. What David did, involving me in a lie to you, I feel terrible about it. I gestured for her to sit at the counter while I refreshed my own coffee. As I said yesterday, it's not your fault. You believed what he told you. That's just it, she said, her voice tinged with frustration. I should have known better. There have been other times where David has stretched the truth about what you would be okay with. Small things, but enough that I should have questioned this more. This was new information, a hint that the pattern I had been grappling with extended beyond our home, affecting how David represented our relationship to others. What other times? Lisa looked uncomfortable, clearly regretting opening this door but unwilling to backtrack now. Just little things, like when he borrowed money from me a few months ago, saying you two were short because of some investment you had made. Or when he took those concert tickets I had bought for Brian's birthday, saying you both would use them because we couldn't go anymore. Each example landed like a small blow. The investment story was entirely fabricated. Our finances, while not extravagant, were stable and carefully managed. And I had never known about any concert tickets, had never attended a show that might have been meant for Lisa and her husband. "I see," I said finally, struggling to maintain my composure. I wasn't aware of either of those situations. Lisa's expression crumpled. "I'm so sorry, Emma. I never would have come here if I thought I was causing more problems. I just wanted you to know that I understand why you were upset yesterday, and that I should have checked with you directly instead of taking David's word." "I appreciate that," I said, meaning it despite the fresh hurt her revelations had caused. "And it helps to know about these other incidents. It clarifies some things I've been trying to understand." We talked for a while longer, the conversation shifting to safer topics: her children's activities, my conference presentation, the general minutiae of daily life that served as neutral territory. By the time she left, promising to pay for any costs associated with the car incident, the initial tension had eased into something approaching our normal sister-in-law dynamic. After closing the door behind her, I leaned against it, processing this new layer of complexity. David hadn't just made unilateral decisions about my property or my boundaries. He had been creating a narrative about our relationship for others that bore little resemblance to reality, using my name, my supposed preferences, to justify actions I knew nothing about. The tracking device had revealed more than an unauthorized car loan. It had become the thread that, when pulled, was unraveling an entire fabric of small deceptions and casual disregards. The question now was what to do with this knowledge, how to approach the conversation promised for this evening. Returning to my office, I found it impossible to recapture the productive flow of the morning. Instead, I opened a new document and began listing incidents over the past few years where David had made decisions that should have been mutual, times when my input had been dismissed or my boundaries crossed. The exercise was both clarifying and disturbing, the pattern more extensive than I had consciously acknowledged. By late afternoon, I had compiled a sobering record of our relationship's erosion. Not dramatic betrayals or obvious mistreatment, but a steady accumulation of small disrespects that had gradually normalized the idea that my autonomy was somehow less important, my needs secondary to whatever David deemed convenient or necessary, in the moment. The garage door opener hummed at 5:37 p.m., announcing David's return earlier than his usual workday typically allowed. I saved the document, closed my laptop, and moved to the living room, selecting a neutral territory for the conversation ahead. He entered carrying a bouquet of lilies, my favorite, and a small gift bag, his expression hovering between contrite and hopeful. Peace offerings for a conflict he still didn't fully understand. "I left work early," he said unnecessarily, extending the flowers. "I thought we could go to dinner, talk somewhere nice." I accepted the bouquet with murmured thanks, but made no move toward the door. "I'd prefer to talk here, David, without distractions." His smile faltered slightly, but he nodded, setting the gift bag on the coffee table and taking a seat across from me. "I've been thinking about everything, about what you said last night. I want you to know that I understand why you were upset, and I'm sorry for not asking before lending your car to Lisa." The apology addressed the specific incident, but neatly sidestepped the larger pattern it represented. Still, it was a starting point. "Thank you for acknowledging that," I said carefully. "But David, the car is just the most recent example of something that's been happening for years. You make decisions that should be mutual. You dismiss my concerns as overreactions. You act as if my boundaries are suggestions rather than requirements." He frowned, defensive posture returning. "That's a pretty harsh assessment of our entire relationship based on a few misunderstandings." "It's not just a few misunderstandings. Lisa came by today." His expression shifted, wariness replacing defensiveness. "What did she want?" "To apologize for her role in the car situation. And in the process, she mentioned other instances." "Money? You claimed we needed for an investment that never existed, Concert tickets you took that were meant for her husband's birthday. David's gaze dropped to his hands, the deflection strategies momentarily abandoned in the face of concrete examples. Those were different situations. Complicated. Complicated by lies, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the hurt pulsing beneath the surface. Lies that involved my name, my supposed consent. Do you understand how violating that feels? To discover you've been using me as justification for things I never agreed to? He was silent for a long moment, fingers working at his wedding band in the nervous gesture I had come to recognize over our years together. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, the familiar charm replaced by something that might have been genuine remorse. I never thought of it that way, as violation. It was easier sometimes to say you were on board, to make decisions without going through the whole discussion process. Easier for whom? I asked, though the answer was obvious. Because from where I'm sitting, all that ease came at the expense of my autonomy, my right to make informed choices about my own life and possessions. David leaned forward, elbows on his knees, face in his hands. I never meant to hurt you, Emma. That was never my intention. I believe that, I said, surprising both of us with the admission. I don't think you set out to disrespect me or violate my boundaries. But intention doesn't change impact. And the impact has been a relationship where I increasingly feel that my needs, my preferences, my very personhood is secondary to your convenience. He looked up, genuine distress evident in his expression. That's not how I see you. Not at all. But it's how you treat me, I countered gently. Actions speak louder than perceptions, David. And your actions consistently demonstrate that you don't view me as an equal partner deserving of consultation and consideration. The silence that followed was heavy with implications, with recognitions neither of us had been willing to fully face until this moment. The gulf between us seemed suddenly vast, built not on a single betrayal but on years of small dismissals, accumulated disregards, and fundamental differences in how we understood partnership. Where does this leave us? David finally asked. The question hanging in the air between us, laden with possibilities both healing and heartbreaking. I had been asking myself the same question since the moment I saw my car moving on the tracking app. The answer remained elusive, complicated by 8 years of shared history, by genuine affection that existed alongside the problematic patterns, by the natural human resistance to acknowledging when something valuable might be irreparably damaged. I don't know, I admitted. What I do know is that I can't continue in a relationship where my boundaries aren't respected, where decisions that affect me are made without my input, where I'm constantly adjusting to accommodate your preferences, while mine are treated as optional. David nodded slowly, the gravity of the situation finally seeming to register. I hear you. I do. And I want to do better, to be better. Tell me what that looks like, what you need from me. The question was well-intentioned, but revealed another layer of the fundamental disconnect between us. That's just it, David. I shouldn't have to provide you with a manual for basic respect. The fact that you're asking me to outline how to treat me as an equal partner is part of the problem. Frustration flickered across his features. So I'm just supposed to know exactly what you want, exactly how to fix this without you telling me? No, I said carefully. What I'm saying is that respect isn't about following specific instructions. It's about approaching our relationship with the fundamental understanding that my autonomy matters, that decisions affecting me require my input, that my boundaries are not negotiable based on your convenience. He stood abruptly, pacing the living room with restless energy. This feels impossible, Emma. Like no matter what I say or do, it's going to be wrong. It's not about right or wrong, I countered, maintaining my calm despite the escalating tension. It's about whether we can build a relationship based on mutual respect and consideration. And right now, I'm not sure that we can, because we seem to have very different understandings of what that means. The stark assessment hung in the air between us, neither accusation nor threat, but simple, painful truth. David stopped pacing, turning to face me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Something between realization and resignation. "You're really questioning our entire marriage over this, aren't you?" "I'm questioning whether we want the same kind of partnership," I clarified. "Whether we share the same fundamental values about how people in a relationship should treat each other." The car incident didn't create these questions, David. It just brought them into sharper focus. He sank back onto the couch, the distance between us both physical and emotional. What happens now? It was the second time he had asked, and my answer remained incomplete, a work in progress rather than a definitive declaration. "I think we need space to consider what we both want, what we're both willing to change. I've already booked a hotel for tonight. I need some distance to think clearly." "You're leaving?" The surprise in his voice was genuine, as if despite everything we had discussed, he hadn't considered that physical separation might be part of the process. "Just for a few days," I assured him, though the timeline was as uncertain as everything else in this moment. "I think we both need time to reflect without the immediate pressure of navigating each other's reactions." David's expression shifted through several emotions: shock, hurt, anger, resignation, before settling into a resigned acceptance. "If that's what you need." "It is," I confirmed, rising from my seat. "I've already packed a bag. I'll be in touch, but please don't try to pressure me into coming back before I'm ready." He nodded, watching as I retrieved the suitcase I had prepared earlier from the hallway closet. The sense of déjà vu was striking. Just days ago, I had been packing for a professional opportunity, excited about possibilities on the horizon. Now I was packing for a different kind of journey, one with no clear destination or timeline. At the door, I paused, turning back to where David remained, seated, the untouched gift bag still on the coffee table between us. "This isn't about punishment, David. It's about clarity, about figuring out whether we can build something healthier than what we've had, or whether we need to acknowledge that we want fundamentally different things from a partnership." He met my gaze, vulnerability replacing the defensive posture he had maintained throughout much of our conversation. "I love you, Emma. Despite everything, I need you to know that." "I believe you," I said, meaning it. "But love without respect isn't enough. It never has been." With those words hanging in the air between us, I stepped through the door into the warm evening, the weight of my suitcase nothing compared to the emotional burden I carried. The decision to leave, even temporarily, hadn't been made lightly, or in the heat of anger. It was the result of recognition that had been building for longer than I cared to admit, that something essential was missing from our relationship, something without which no amount of shared history or affection could sustain us. The hotel I had selected was nothing special. A mid-range chain with comfortable beds and the blessed anonymity of transient accommodations. After checking in and settling into the bland but clean room, I sat on the edge of the bed, the silence enveloping me like a physical presence. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Please let me know you arrived safely." The simple request contained no pressure, no manipulation, no attempt to make me reconsider my decision. Just concern for my well-being, a reminder of the genuine care that existed alongside the problematic patterns. "I'm at the hotel. All fine. We'll be in touch soon." My reply was equally straightforward, acknowledging his concern without opening the door to further conversation. A moment later, another text arrived, this one from Melissa. "Checking in. Still on for lunch tomorrow?" I hesitated, unsure whether I was ready to share the developments of the past few days, to translate the complex emotional landscape into coherent explanation. But isolation served no purpose in times of transformation, and Melissa had been a steadfast presence through previous challenges. Yes, still on. A lot to talk about. The understatement of the year, perhaps, but sufficient for now. Her response came quickly. Here for whatever you need. Just name the time and place. The simple offer of support brought unexpected tears. The first I had allowed myself since the tracking app had revealed my car's unauthorized journey. Until now, I had been operating from a place of controlled clarity, emotions carefully managed, to maintain the focus needed for difficult conversations. But alone in the anonymous hotel room, the full weight of the situation finally registered. Not just the specific betrayal of the car incident, but the cumulative toll of years spent accommodating, adjusting, making myself smaller to fit within, the constraints of David's expectations. The tears, once started, refused to be contained. I cried for the bright-eyed woman who had entered this marriage 8 years ago, full of hope and confidence that gradually dimmed beneath the steady erosion of small disrespects. I cried for the partnership we had believed we were building, for the future we had planned together that now hung in uncertain balance. I cried for David, too, for the genuine love he felt that was nevertheless insufficient without the foundation of mutual respect. Eventually, the storm subsided, leaving behind the peculiar clarity that sometimes follows complete emotional release. I moved to the desk by the window, opening my laptop and creating a new document, different from the cataloging of grievances I had compiled earlier. This one was forward-looking, articulating not what had gone wrong but what I needed going forward. Whether with David or potentially without him. Respect for autonomy and boundaries. Equal voice in decisions. Acknowledgement of professional aspirations. Space for independent growth alongside shared experiences. The list grew as I typed, articulating values and needs that had always existed, but had sometimes been sacrificed in the name of compromise or peace. By the time exhaustion finally claimed me, the document had become something between a manifesto and a mission statement. Not demands for David to meet, but clarity for myself. About what constituted a healthy partnership in my own understanding. Whether our relationship could be reconstructed on this foundation remained an open question, one that would require equal commitment and clarity from David about his own values and needs. As I drifted toward sleep in the unfamiliar bed, the weight of uncertainty was balanced by a surprising sense of possibility. The tracking device had revealed more than just my car's unauthorized journey. It had illuminated patterns long hidden in plain sight, questions too long unasked, needs too long unacknowledged. Whatever path emerged from this painful clarification, I was reclaiming something essential in the process. Not just my boundaries or my autonomy, but my vision of what partnership could and should be. Morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering. Through unfamiliar curtains, the momentary disorientation of waking in a strange place quickly giving way to remembrance. I had left our home, stepped away from the relationship that had defined much of my adult life, not in anger, but in search of clarity that could only come with distance. After a quick shower and coffee from the room's small machine, I checked my phone to find several messages waiting. 2 from David, 1 sent late last night. I'm sorry for everything. Take all the time you need. And another this morning. Thinking of you. Hope you slept well. Their tone was respectful, avoiding both pressure to return and dramatic declarations that might complicate my thinking. The third message was from Lisa. Checking in. Here if you need anything. The final message was from Mark Chen at work. Board approved the promotion this morning. Official announcement next week. But wanted you to hear it first. Congratulations, Director Lawson. The professional triumph landed differently in the context of personal upheaval, not diminished, but existing in a separate sphere, a reminder that life continued on multiple tracks simultaneously. The promotion I had worked toward for years, evidence of my capabilities and contribution, validated in a way that contrasted sharply with the dynamics at home. My reply to Mark was enthusiastic and grateful. My responses to David and Lisa were brief but appreciative, maintaining boundaries. without cruelty. The balance felt important, acknowledging care without opening doors to conversations I wasn't ready to have. As I prepared for lunch with Melissa, selecting a casual outfit from the limited wardrobe I had packed, I realized that the heaviness that had accompanied me to the hotel had lightened somewhat overnight. Not because the situation had resolved, or the hurt had diminished, but because clarity, even painful clarity, carried its own kind of relief after prolonged confusion. The tracking device that had revealed my car's unauthorized journey had become the catalyst for a different kind of tracking, the careful mapping of patterns long overlooked, the tracing of boundaries crossed and compromises made that had gradually altered the landscape of my relationship. Whether that relationship could be rebuilt on different terms remained uncertain, but the clarity itself was valuable, a compass pointing toward authenticity regardless of the specific path ahead. The cafe Melissa had chosen was tucked away on a tree-lined street, its patio shaded by canvas umbrellas in cheerful yellow. It was our usual meeting spot, equidistant between our respective offices, with food good enough to justify the slightly higher prices. I arrived first, selecting a corner table that offered privacy without complete isolation. Melissa appeared, precisely at the agreed time, her naturally punctual nature, one of the many qualities that had cemented our friendship over the years. She spotted me immediately, her expression shifting from casual greeting to concern as she approached. "You look tired," she said by way of greeting, sliding into the seat opposite mine. "And you're staying at a hotel. What happened?" No preamble, no small talk. Directness had always been Melissa's style, especially when she sensed something was wrong. It was one of the reasons I valued her friendship so deeply. "My promotion came through," I said, starting with the simpler news. Her face brightened. "That's fantastic. Director Lawson has a nice ring to it. But," her gaze sharpened, "that doesn't explain the hotel or why you look like you've barely slept." I took a breath, organizing the complex tangle of events into something coherent. I discovered David took my car from the airport while I was at the conference and loaned it to Lisa without asking me. He was planning to return it before I got back, so I'd never know. Melissa's eyebrows rose. "How did you find out?" "I have a tracking device installed. After the last time he borrowed something without permission and returned it damaged." She absorbed this information slowly, her expression thoughtful rather than immediately judgmental. "That's concerning behavior from both sides, honestly. The tracking device suggests you already didn't trust him." "I trusted the evidence of past behavior," I clarified, "and it proved justified." The server arrived to take our orders, a momentary pause in the conversation. Once he departed, Melissa leaned forward, her tone gentle but direct. "What happened after you discovered the car was missing?" I recounted the events of the past few days, tracking the car to Lisa's workplace, confronting her at the intersection, the subsequent conversations with both Lisa and David, and finally, my decision to temporarily move into a hotel to gain clarity. Melissa listened without interruption, her expression shifting between concern, understanding, and occasional flashes of indignation on my behalf. When I finished, she sat back, processing everything I had shared. "It's not about the car," she said finally. I nodded, relieved by her immediate grasp of the situation's core. It never was. It's about a pattern of disregard, of decisions made unilaterally that should have been mutual. She wasn't asking a question, simply articulating the understanding we now shared. Exactly. And about what that pattern reveals about how David fundamentally views our relationship, as something where his convenience, his preferences, his decisions naturally take precedence over mine. Melissa sipped her water, considering her next words carefully. "You said you're staying at a hotel to gain clarity. What does clarity look like in this situation?" It was the question I had been asking myself since the moment I left our home, the one that had kept me awake in the hotel room despite physical exhaustion. What was I hoping to achieve with this separation? What outcome would constitute success? I need to understand whether what David and I want from a relationship is fundamentally compatible, I said slowly. Whether we can build something based on mutual respect and consideration, or whether the patterns are too deeply entrenched to change. And if they are? Melissa asked gently. Too entrenched, I mean. The possibility hung in the air between us, the unspoken acknowledgement that some relationships, despite genuine love and shared history, simply couldn't evolve into what both people needed. Then I'll have to make difficult decisions, I admitted, about whether I can accept the relationship as it is, with its limitations, or whether I need something different moving forward. Our food arrived, temporarily shifting the conversation to lighter topics. Melissa's recent vacation, a mutual friend's engagement, the upcoming changes my promotion would bring to my professional responsibilities. The break from emotional intensity was welcome, a reminder that life continued in all its mundane glory even amid personal turmoil. As we finished our meals, Melissa returned to the more serious subject with characteristic directness. What do you think David is doing with this time apart? Do you think he's reflecting as deeply as you are? The question gave me pause. I had been so focused on my own process, my own clarity-seeking, that I hadn't fully considered how David might be using the separation. Was he engaged in similar self-examination? Or was he simply waiting for my return, expecting the storm to pass as previous tensions had? I don't know, I admitted. His messages have been respectful, not pressuring me to come back, but that could mean many things. Melissa nodded thoughtfully. Do you want the relationship to work? If you strip away all the hurt and frustration of the moment, looking at the whole of your marriage, is this a partnership you want to fight for? The question cut through layers of justified anger and accumulated resentment to the heart of the matter. Did I want to salvage this relationship, to rebuild it on a healthier foundation? Or was I simply going through the motions of consideration before making a decision I had already subconsciously reached? Parts of it, yes, I said finally. The partnership we had in the early years, before these patterns became entrenched. The connection we built, the life we envisioned together. But I can't go back to accepting disregard as the price of keeping the peace. Then perhaps that's your starting point for any conversation about moving forward, Melissa suggested. Not ultimatums or detailed rules of engagement, but clarity about which aspects of the relationship you value and want to preserve, and which patterns represent deal breakers for you. Her framing resonated, offering a pathway that neither demanded perfection nor accepted fundamental disrespect. As we parted after lunch, her final words stayed with me. Whatever you decide, make sure it comes from clarity rather than reaction. This isn't just about David's behavior or even about your marriage. It's about the kind of life you want to create moving forward. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of practical considerations. I contacted HR about the paperwork for my promotion, arranged for my existing projects to be temporarily managed by team members during my transition, and dealt with the mundane logistics of hotel living. Laundry, meals, the small discomforts of temporary accommodation. David texted, "Once in the afternoon. I've been doing a lot of thinking. When you're ready to talk, I have some things I'd like to share. No pressure, no manipulation, no attempt to rush my process." It was a marked departure from his typical approach to conflict, where resolution often seemed prioritized over understanding. I responded with simple acknowledgement, promising to let him know when I felt ready for further conversation. That evening, alone in the hotel room with takeout and my laptop, I received an unexpected email from Lisa. The subject line was simple: "Some context you might want." Opening it revealed a lengthy message detailing interactions with David over the years that I had never been aware of. Occasions where he had represented my opinion or preferences in ways that didn't align with reality. Times when he had made commitments on my behalf without consultation. Nothing as significant as the car incident, but a pattern of small misrepresentations that painted a concerning picture when viewed collectively. She concluded with an apology for not sharing these observations sooner, and a sincere wish for my well-being regardless of what decisions lay ahead. "You've always been more than just my brother's wife," she wrote. "Whatever happens between you and David, I hope we can maintain our own connection." The email added another layer to my understanding, confirming that the patterns I was grappling with extended beyond our home to how David represented our relationship to others. It wasn't malicious in the conventional sense. He wasn't deliberately trying to hurt or control me. But the cumulative effect was a steady erosion of my autonomy, my voice, my equal standing in our partnership. 3 days passed in this liminal space of separation and reflection. I maintained minimal contact with David, acknowledging his messages but avoiding substantive discussion until I felt ready. My days were filled with work preparations, conversations with Melissa and other friends, long walks that helped clear my mind of circular thinking. Gradually, clarity began to emerge. Not about whether the relationship could be saved, but about what would be required to make that salvation meaningful rather than superficial. The tracking device that had revealed my car's unauthorized journey had become a metaphor for the larger process of illumination, bringing patterns long hidden, in shadow into the clear light of conscious examination. On the 4th morning of our separation, I texted David, "I'd like to meet and talk. Not at home. The park by the lake, 2 p.m.? His response came quickly. "I'll be there, thank you." The park had been a favorite spot early in our relationship, a place where we had spent countless hours walking, talking, planning the future we hoped to build together. There was symbolism in returning there now, standing at another crossroads, another moment of decision and possibility. I arrived first, selecting a bench overlooking the lake, partially shaded by a maple tree beginning to show hints of autumn color. The September air carried a slight chill, a reminder of seasons changing, of time passing despite personal turmoil. David appeared precisely at 2, punctuality being one of his consistent traits. He approached slowly, as if uncertain of his welcome, stopping a respectful distance from the bench. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the space beside me. I nodded, noting the careful way he maintained a small distance between us as he sat, his body angled slightly toward mine without crowding. Small considerations that might once have gone unnoticed now registered as intentional efforts. "Thank you for suggesting we meet," he began. "These days apart. They've given me a lot to think about." "Me too," I acknowledged, turning slightly to face him more directly. "I've been trying to understand not just what happened with the car, but the patterns it represents in our relationship." David nodded, his expression serious. "I've been doing the same, and I owe you an apology, not just for taking your car, without permission, but for all the times I've made decisions that should have been mutual, dismissed your concerns, acted as if my convenience naturally took precedence over your autonomy." The specificity of his acknowledgement caught me off guard. It wasn't the generic apology I had half expected, the "I'm sorry if you felt hurt" non-admission that places the burden on the recipient's perception rather than the actor's behavior. "Lisa sent me an email," I said, watching his reaction carefully, "detailing other instances where you've represented my opinions or made commitments on my behalf without consulting me." A flash of something, guilt perhaps or embarrassment, crossed his features before he nodded slowly. "She sent me one too. Called me out on a pattern I hadn't fully acknowledged to myself. It was uncomfortable reading, but necessary." "What did you take from it?" I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective, his understanding of how his actions had affected our relationship. David was silent for a moment, gaze shifting to the lake as he seemed to gather his thoughts. When he turned back to me, his expression held a vulnerability I hadn't seen in years. "I realized I've been treating our relationship as if your independence, your separate identity, was somehow threatening rather than essential, he said slowly, as if every boundary you established, every preference you expressed that differed from mine was a rejection rather than simply you being your own person. The insight surprised me with its depth, its recognition of dynamics I had felt but struggled to articulate. Why do you think that is? He shrugged slightly, a gesture that conveyed uncertainty rather than dismissal. I've been asking myself the same question. Part of it, I think, comes from watching my parents' marriage, where my father made all the decisions and my mother accommodated without question. It was the model I absorbed, even while consciously believing in equality. The reference to his family patterns resonated, offering context without excusing the behavior. We had discussed his parents' traditional marriage before, but never explicitly connected it to the dynamics developing in our own relationship. There's more to it, though, he continued after a moment. When you stepped back from your career, early in our marriage to support my advancement, I think I began to see your ambitions, your separate goals, as somehow secondary to mine by default. It wasn't conscious, but it shaped how I approached decisions, how I weighed your preferences against my convenience. The acknowledgement of this fundamental imbalance, this gradual redistribution of whose needs and desires took priority, struck a chord of recognition. It wasn't that David had never supported my professional aspirations. He had often expressed pride in my accomplishments. But there had been an unspoken assumption that my career would naturally accommodate his, that my goals were flexible, while his were fixed. I appreciate your honesty, I said finally, and your willingness to examine these patterns. But recognition alone doesn't change embedded behaviors. What would moving forward look like for you? For us? David shifted on the bench, turning more fully toward me, his expression earnest. I've been thinking about that a lot. Concrete changes, not just good intentions. I've scheduled sessions with a therapist to explore these patterns more deeply, to understand why I default to these behaviors and how to genuinely change them. This step toward professional help, taken without prompting or ultimatum, registered as significant, a recognition that the issues required more than simple awareness or temporary adjustments. Beyond that, he continued, I want to establish new patterns of communication and decision-making. Regular check-ins about boundaries and expectations, explicit conversations about decisions that affect both of us rather than unilateral actions, justified after the fact. His proposals were thoughtful, addressing not just the specific incidents that had precipitated our separation, but the underlying dynamics that had eroded trust and respect over time. Yet questions remained, uncertainties about whether theoretical understanding could translate into consistent behavioral change. These are good starting points, I acknowledged. But rebuilding trust takes time, especially when patterns have been established over years rather than isolated incidents. David nodded, accepting this reality without defensiveness. I know, and I'm not asking you to come home today, to simply take my word that things will be different. I'm asking for the chance to demonstrate change over time, to rebuild what's been damaged through consistent actions rather than promises. The wind shifted, sending ripples across the lake's surface, a visual reminder of how small disturbances can alter apparently calm waters. We sat in silence for several moments, each processing the conversation, the possibilities and limitations it represented. I received the promotion, I said finally, changing direction slightly. Director of Research Development, effective next month. A genuine smile spread across David's face, pride evident in his expression. That's fantastic, Emma. You've earned it through years of exceptional work. Congratulations. Thank you. It means longer hours initially, more responsibility, potentially. Some travel as we expand into new markets. As it should, he said without hesitation. Your career deserves that investment, that priority. The unequivocal support, the absence of subtle caveats or expectations of accommodation, felt both right and unfamiliar. a glimpse of how our partnership could function when mutual success was genuinely celebrated rather than hierarchically prioritized. "What do you need from me?" David asked after another moment of silence. "To feel safe exploring whether we can rebuild our relationship on healthier terms?" The question was unexpected in its directness, its focus on my needs, rather than his hopes or expectations. It deserved an equally thoughtful response. "Continued space," I began slowly. "Time and separate living arrangements while we work through these issues, so that any steps toward reconciliation come from genuine change rather than the gravitational pull of shared habits and proximity." He nodded, accepting this boundary, without protest. "What else?" "Couples counseling," I continued. "In addition to your individual therapy, a neutral space where we can address these patterns with professional guidance, establish new ways of communicating and making decisions." Agreed," he said simply. "I've already researched some options. Therapists who specialize in rebuilding trust and establishing healthier relationship dynamics." His proactive approach, the concrete steps already taken rather than vague assurances of future action, registered as meaningful. Not guarantees of lasting change, but indications of genuine effort and recognition of the work required. "Most importantly," I added, meeting his gaze directly, "I need to know that you understand this isn't about the car or any specific incident. It's about a fundamental shift in how we approach partnership, from hierarchical to truly equal, from assumed consent to explicit communication." David held my gaze, his expression solemn. "I understand. And I want that too, Emma. Not just because it's what you need, but because it's what will make our relationship healthier, more fulfilling for both of us. The patterns we've fallen into haven't just hurt you, they've limited what our partnership could be, the genuine connection and mutual growth we could experience." The insight surprised me with its depth, its recognition that the dynamics I was challenging hadn't served him particularly well either, despite the surface-level convenience they had provided. True partnership, genuine intimacy required mutual respect and consideration that our recent patterns had increasingly lacked. "So, where does this leave us?" I asked, echoing his question from days earlier, though now with a different tone. Not despairing or defensive, but genuinely curious. "About the path forward? In a place of potential," David suggested after a moment's reflection. "Not starting over, we have too much history for that, but rebuilding on a foundation that honors what worked in our relationship while addressing what didn't. If you're willing to try." The question hung in the air between us, laden with 8 years of shared history, with genuine love that had never fully disappeared despite the accumulated hurts, with possibilities both healing and heartbreaking. The decision wasn't simple, couldn't be reduced to staying or leaving, to forgiveness or resentment. It was about weighing potential against probability, about determining whether what could be justified the work required to get there. "I'm willing to try," I said finally. Not with guarantees of outcome, but with openness to possibility. To see whether the relationship we both value can evolve into something healthier, more mutually fulfilling. Relief washed across David's features, tempered by understanding that this was a beginning rather than a resolution, a willingness to explore rather than a promise of reconciliation. "Thank you," he said simply, "for the chance to demonstrate, through actions rather than just words, that I understand what needs to change." As we sat together watching the lake, the conversation shifting to practical considerations of next steps, finding a couples therapist, establishing communication boundaries during our continued separation, coordinating necessities like mail and household management, I felt a cautious sense of possibility emerging from the pain of recent revelations. The tracking device that had illuminated my car's unauthorized journey had set in motion a process of examination and clarification far beyond its intended purpose. It had revealed not just a specific breach of trust, but patterns long hidden. In plain sight, questions too long unasked, needs too long unacknowledged. Whether those revelations ultimately led to reconciliation or separation remained uncertain, but the clarity itself was valuable, a compass pointing toward authenticity regardless of the specific path ahead. As afternoon light began to soften, toward evening, David and I walked together toward the park entrance, maintaining a small physical distance that reflected our current emotional reality, connected by shared history and potential future, yet separated by necessary boundaries and ongoing work. The path forward wasn't clear or guaranteed, but it was illuminated by mutual recognition of what needed to change, by willingness to engage in the difficult, necessary work of genuine transformation. The tracking device had revealed my car's unauthorized journey. The journey that followed, through hurt and clarification, separation and reflection, was revealing something infinitely more valuable: the possibility of authentic partnership based not on accommodation or assumed hierarchy, but on mutual respect, explicit communication, and genuine celebration of each other's autonomy and growth. Whether that possibility would ultimately manifest remained to be seen, dependent on continued effort and consistent change rather than momentary insight or good intentions. But standing at this crossroads, I felt something I hadn't experienced in longer than I cared to admit. Not certainty or even optimism necessarily, but genuine agency in determining the shape of my own life, my own relationships, my own future. The tracking device had located my car. The journey that followed was helping me locate myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.